Jimi Hendrix entered a country guitar competition on Lower Broadway in Nashville, Tennessee, under the name Jimmy Adams. It was October 4th, 1968. The following evening, the Jimi Hendrix Experience was playing the Municipal Auditorium. But Jimmy had history in Nashville that went back years before anyone outside the R&B circuit knew who he was. Years of playing the clubs and the bars and the venues along the South's working music route as a sideman and then as a solo act, calling himself Jimmy James. Jimmy knew Nashville. Jimmy knew it well enough to know that on a Thursday night on Lower Broadway, a quiet man in a plain shirt with borrowed glasses could sign an entry form as Jimmy Adams, age 25, Seattle, and nobody would look twice. The idea had come from Ray Coleman, an old friend from the Chitlin Circuit days who still lived in Nashville and who had called Jimmy's hotel room that afternoon to say hello and who had, by the end of the call, talked Jimmy into the most entertaining use of a Thursday night either of them could conceive. The head judge was a Nashville session guitarist named Tom Greer, who had 30 years of country and western technique behind him and who trusted his assessment of a player completely. Tom listened to Jimmy's carefully unremarkable first-round performance and delivered his verdict with the authority of 3 decades. "Decent," Tom said, "but you've got no natural feel for the Nashville sound. You've made the cut, Jimmy, but you need to spend more time with the music before the music will spend time with you." In the back of the room, Ray Coleman put his hat on the table and buried his face in it. "Drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now because this is only the beginning of what Jimi Hendrix left behind, and every week there's another story no one has told before." The venue was the Tennessee Star on Lower Broadway, a narrow 2-story honky-tonk that had been running Thursday night guitar contests since 1961, offering $10 and a house tab to the winner and whatever bragging rights a Thursday on Broadway could provide. The contest drew between 12 and 15 acts each week, ran from 8 until approximately 11, and was judged by Tom Greer, who had been volunteering his assessment every Thursday for the past 4 years, because the Tennessee Star's owner had asked him and because Tom Greer had opinions about guitar playing that he had been refining across 30 years of Nashville sessions and that he welcomed any legitimate venue to express. Tom Greer's assessments were delivered plainly and without softening. In 4 years of Thursday nights, Tom Greer had been significantly wrong about a player fewer times than he could count on one hand. Tom Greer was 61 years old and had been a session guitarist on Nashville recordings since the late 1930s. Tom had developed across 3 decades of country and western sessions a comprehensive understanding of what the guitar could do in that tradition and a clear category system for guitarists that had served him well for 61 years. Rock musicians occupied their own category, adjacent to but distinct from the country tradition, and the two rarely interacted in ways that required Tom to revise anything. Jimi Hendrix had first come to Nashville in 1962, 19 years old, and recently released from the Army at Fort Campbell in Kentucky, crossing the state line into Tennessee with a guitar and no fixed plans. Jimmy had played sessions and bar gigs and pickup shows across Nashville for the better part of 2 years, learning what the city's rooms sounded like and what they wanted from a guitarist and how to give them exactly that. By 1964, Jimmy had moved on to New York, to the Chitlin Circuit, to the chain of rooms that eventually led to Greenwich Village and Chas Chandler and London. But Jimmy never forgot what Nashville had taught him, which was considerable. Ray Coleman had been in Nashville since 1963 and had known Jimmy from the Rooms, the musicians who had been in the same venues in the early 1960s. Ray had bought Are You Experienced when it came out. Ray had told everyone he knew that he and Jimmy had played on the same bills. Ray called the hotel in the early afternoon of October 4th, and the call had started as a genuine catching up and had evolved, through the specific logic of 2 musicians with a shared history and a free Thursday evening and a Lower Broadway full of guitar nights, into a plan that both of them recognized immediately as the obvious use of the evening. Jimmy arrived at the Tennessee Star at 7:45, wearing a plain dark shirt borrowed from Ray's apartment, a jacket over it, and a pair of reading glasses that Ray had produced from his coat pocket with the slightly guilty expression of someone who has been carrying them specifically for this purpose. Jimmy signed the entry form at the bar. Jimmy Adams, age 25, Seattle, Washington. Occupation, musician. The bartender said, "You're number 8, Jimmy, on," at 9:15. Jimmy went to find Ray at the back table. The contest ran from 8 o'clock with 14 acts in the first round. Tom Greer sat at his judge's table with the focused patience of someone who has done this many times and who finds meaning in the consistency of doing it well. The acts included a 17-year-old who played Merle Haggard with impressive emotional maturity, a working session man who played his own material with solid professional craft, and several acts at varying levels of ability who received Tom's assessments with the mixture of gratitude and wounded dignity that judges' verdicts typically produce. Jimmy was called 8th. Jimi Hendrix walked to the small performance area at the front of the Tennessee Star with the deliberate unremarkability of someone who has decided in advance exactly what kind of performer to be for the next 3 minutes. Jimmy sat. Jimmy accepted the house acoustic guitar, a Gibson J200, well-maintained and played in. Jimmy tuned it with the mild concentration of someone working through an unfamiliar instrument. Then Jimi Hendrix played a 12-bar country blues that was rhythmically steady, harmonically correct, and stripped of every instinct that Jimi Hendrix had spent 15 years developing. The playing was the musical equivalent of a person who can run a 4-minute mile walking at a comfortable stroll for the bus. Everything was technically present. Nothing was alive in the specific way that made things alive. Tom Greer listened with the careful attention he gave every act. Tom made notes. Then Tom leaned into the microphone. Tom said, "Decent enough, son. Your timing is solid and you've got some basic feel for the structure, but you've got no natural feel for the Nashville sound. There's something in your playing that's pulling against the music instead of going with it. You've made the cut, Jimmy, but you need to spend more time with this music before it'll spend time with you." Tom moved to Act 9. Jimi Hendrix walked to the back of the room, sat down across from Ray Coleman, and picked up his drink. Ray had both hands flat on the table surface and was staring at them with the expression of someone engaged in a serious internal negotiation about whether it was physically possible to laugh this hard without making any sound. The hat was on the table. Ray's face was currently in his hands. A woman at the adjacent table asked if he was feeling well. Ray said he was fine. "Thank you very much, just something caught in his throat." 6 acts went through to the semifinal. Jimmy was among them. So was a 20-year-old guitarist from Bowling Green, Kentucky, named Danny Pruitt, who had played an original composition in the first round with a technique and musical maturity that had produced the specific quality of silence in a room that a performance produces when it is genuinely better than expected. Ray Coleman had nudged Jimmy's arm when Danny played. Jimmy had watched with the focused attention he gave to musicians doing something real. For his semi-final performance, Jimmy played a slightly more developed country blues, adding some melodic movement and brief passages of fingerstyle work that hinted at a deeper vocabulary without in any way approaching it. Tom Greer's semi-final assessment acknowledged the improvement. "Better," Tom said. "You're finding more feel. It's still not Nashville. There's still something in your approach that belongs to a different tradition, but you're closer. You're in the final, Jimmy." Jimmy nodded with the appropriate humility of a man receiving constructive criticism. Ray Coleman left the Tennessee Star, stood on Lower Broadway for 5 minutes, and returned when he was confident he could sit at a table like a normal person. The final had 3 contestants. Danny Pruitt from Bowling Green, who was the clear standout of the evening and who had the room's full attention when he played. A 45-year-old Nashville veteran named Carl Brooks, solid and crowd-pleasing and supported by a vocal contingent of friends, and Jimmy Adams from Seattle, who needed to spend more time with the Nashville sound before the Nashville sound would spend time with him. Danny played first and delivered the best guitar performance the Tennessee Star's Thursday contest had seen in its 7-year history. Tom Greer wrote his assessment in full, and it was the warmest thing Tom Greer had written about a player in 4 years of Thursdays. Ray Coleman clapped with the specific enthusiasm of someone who was also expressing a second, much larger thing simultaneously. Carl played second, his friends enthusiastic and the room appreciative. Then Tom Greer called the last name, Jimmy Adams. Jimi Hendrix walked to the performance area for the final time. Jimmy sat on the stool. Jimmy positioned the Gibson J200 across his knee. Jimmy looked out at the 60 or so people in the Tennessee Star on a Thursday night on Lower Broadway in Nashville, Tennessee in October 1968. Then Jimi Hendrix took off the reading glasses, folded them, and placed them on the floor beside the stool. Then Jimi Hendrix began to play Little Wing. The opening notes arrived in the Tennessee Star with the quality of something that had no business being in that room and was there anyway. Little Wing had been on the record since December 1967, 10 months, and everyone in that room who listened to music had heard it. But what was coming from the acoustic guitar was not the record. What was coming from the acoustic guitar was the song as the person who wrote it heard it inside, played with the specific combination of technique and feeling that technique alone cannot produce and feeling alone cannot organize. The Gibson J200, which had been politely competent in Jimmy Adams's hands for 2 previous rounds, was producing sounds that made Tom Greer's pen stop moving above his scoring card. Tom's pen did not resume moving. Tom's pen eventually tilted sideways and rolled to the edge of the table. A woman in the second row said to the room, "That's Little Wing." The man beside her said after a moment, "That is Jimi Hendrix." The name moved through the Tennessee Star the way such names move through a room, quickly and with the specific quality of becoming obvious to everyone at once. A musician near the bar said it to the bartender. Ray Coleman was standing on his chair at the back, hat raised above his head, and was making no effort whatsoever to look like a normal person. Jimi Hendrix played Little Wing to its completion with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly what the song is and what it requires. Then Jimmy stood, walked to the microphone, and said, with the warm and entirely genuine modesty of someone who has just delivered the punchline of a 3-hour joke, "Tom is right. I've got no natural feel for the Nashville sound. I've been trying to develop one since about 1962 when I first came to this city, and clearly I still have work to do." The laughter from 60 people on Lower Broadway in Nashville on a Thursday evening in October was the kind of laughter that starts in pure surprise and ends in genuine love for the specific person who produced it. Tom Greer was laughing. Tom's scoring card, with its 3 rounds of assessments about Jimmy Adams's inadequate feel for the Nashville sound and the specific ways in which Jimmy Adams's playing belonged to a different tradition, lay in front of him as the most accurately and most inaccurately written document in Nashville that evening. Tom laughed until there were tears, and Tom was a man who had not cried in public since his mother's funeral in 1951. Jimmy walked to the judge's table. Jimmy said, "You were right about one thing. There is something in my playing that belongs to a different tradition." Jimmy said, "That's because I grew up in Seattle and got my musical education in the clubs of the South and then played in New York and London. My sound comes from all of those places." Tom said, "And it turns out that's a perfectly adequate substitute for the Nashville sound." Jimmy said, "I told you I needed more practice." Jimmy turned to Danny Pruitt, who was standing at the side of the room with the wide-eyed expression of a 20-year-old who has just watched Jimi Hendrix play Little Wing on an acoustic guitar and be called Jimmy Adams for 3 rounds. Jimmy said, "That player, Danny, played the best guitar I heard tonight. Give him the $10 and the tab. He's earned both." Danny Pruitt received the prize, the tab, and a brief conversation with Jimi Hendrix that he described for the rest of his life as the most formative 10 minutes of his musical education. Danny Pruitt went on to a long career in Nashville. When people asked how it started, Danny always told the story. Danny would say, "I won a Thursday night contest at the Tennessee Star. Jimi Hendrix was the runner-up. He told the room I'd played the best guitar he'd heard that night. I've been trying to live up to that ever since." Jimmy shook Tom Greer's hand on the way out. Tom said, "I told Jimi Hendrix he had no natural feel for the Nashville sound. I am going to have to live with that." Jimmy said, "You gave an honest assessment of what you heard." Jimmy said, "You should put it on a wall." Tom Greer did exactly that. At the Tennessee Star on Lower Broadway, in a wooden frame above the bar, was mounted the original scoring card from the Thursday night contest of October 4th, 1968. 3 rounds of Tom Greer's handwriting. Round 1. Decent, no natural feel for Nashville sound, made the cut. Round 2, closer, still belongs to a different tradition, made the final. Final, disqualified. It was Jimi Hendrix. Below the card, in Tom's handwriting, October 4th, 1968. The night I told Jimi Hendrix he had no feel for the Nashville sound. Municipal Auditorium, October 5th. Same guitarist. I really should have known. If this story gave you something, leave a comment below. Tell us where in the world you are watching from out there tonight. And subscribe for more stories like this one. The Thursday evenings on Lower Broadway, the borrowed reading glasses, the nights when Jimi Hendrix played 3 rounds of deliberately ordinary guitar and then played Little Wing in a Nashville honky-tonk because an old friend called the hotel and had a good idea. There's always another story every week, and if this one reached you, the next one will too.